HRN listeners. As we celebrate our 15th year, we are deepening our commitment to giving voice to the next generation of food systems storytellers, and we need your help. Our internship and fellowship programs help activate new possibilities for underrepresented and underestimated young people through experiential journalism, audio engineering, and production training. Through these unique programs, HRN helps food equity stewards build essential workforce readiness skills that expand their potential and foster economic mobility. Please consider supporting these critical programs. And with a minimum donation, you can be entered to win a dinner for two at an amazing restaurant in one of 8 cities and tickets to a concert at a great venue in one of those cities. We have incredible partners across the country who have donated, as they also share our passion for helping to educate the next generation of food systems storytellers. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. And make sure you donate before March 31st. Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by Castor and Pollux, maker of America's #1 organic pet food, Organics. Look for their newest line, Pristine, the only complete line of pet food made with responsibly sourced ingredients. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org/pets.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. We're a member-supported food radio network broadcasting over 35 weekly shows live from Bushwick, Brooklyn. Join our hosts as they lead you through the world of craft brewing, behind the scenes of the restaurant industry, inside the battle over school food, and beyond. Find us at heritageradionetwork.org.
Welcome to the Grape Nation, your weekly wine journey. Our guest is Jay McInerney, author, columnist, and overall passionate wine guy. We'll talk to Jay about wine, books, culture, and more. We'll also taste an Austrian Riesling for our weekly wine sip. I'm your host, Sam Ben-Ruby. Stay with us for the Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network. We bring wine to the people. Jay McInerney is the critically acclaimed author of 13 books. Am I right on that? 13?
That sounds about right.
Okay. 13 books, including Bright Lights, Big City, Story of My Life, Brightness Falls, and The Good Life. He has written 3 wine books, Bacchus and Me, A Hedonist in the Cellar, and The Juice. Jay is currently the wine columnist for Town and Country magazine, a correspondent for online site Prince Street. Still doing that, right?
Yeah, the podcast.
The podcast.
Live from Prince Street.
Right.
Yep.
He was previously the wine critic for the Wall Street Journal and House and Garden magazine. His 8th novel, Bright Precious Days, was released about a year ago this month, and it became available in paperback in the past few months. So look out for Bright Precious Days.
Is that my 8th, really? Huh.
Ninth.
Maybe 9th. I don't know. I should really get this straight.
Yeah. Jay, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
I'm happy to have you here.
Thank you.
I want to, of course to me and of course to our audience, you're one of the more prolific authors of a generation. I give you that compliment. I want to focus on your recent past and the present. So basically what I'm saying is I want to talk to the wine Jay.
Yeah.
But the novelist Jay is, so wherever but I'm going to probe you on wine.
He's in the studio.
Yeah, he's in the studio.
We won't
sure.
necessarily hear
and
from
it'll
him.
work its way in. So to get things started, I usually try to get a little background on our guests. To me, the obvious question to get everything started is when you first got into wine.
Yeah.
But the second part of the question is when did you start seriously writing and covering wine? Because we knew you were a writer. So give us some kind of chronological.
Well, when I was writing my first novel, I was in Syracuse, New York.
We're talking mid '80s or late '80s.
Yeah, it was sort of let's say, I wrote Bright Lights, Big City in 1983, and 82, 83. I was at Syracuse University studying with Raymond Carver and Tobias Wolff, two of the great short story writers of our times, and it was really fortunate to have both of those guys in the same place. Although Syracuse wasn't exactly the garden spot of America.
No.
So I had a fellowship there. I had a stipend, but it wasn't quite enough to live on. And so I got a job at a place called the Westcott Cordial Shop,
In Syracuse,
which
cordial shop.
Yeah, I guess you would say it was a wine/liquor store. Although there were a fair amount of our sales were. Industrially fortified grape juice, like wild Irish Rose in MD 2020. So, yeah, that was about 40% of our business. That paid the rent, probably.
Yeah.
But the owner was a Princeton grad and a wine enthusiast, and so number one, he had a very good wine library in the store. Which I dipped into, and he also had a shelf of kind of premium wines that someone would occasionally dust off and buy. In fact, I was working at the store the day that I get the phone call saying that Bright Lights Big City was going to be published.
Wow.
And so I did dust off one of the bottles there. As I recall, it was a 78 Smith Haute Lafitte. I like the name.
Not a great vintage here, but a good wine.
But I like the name and I like the label. And it had this very cool sort of blue and yellow label with a kind of shield, and the fact that the name Lafitte was part of it was also very alluring, but. But even before then, every night I would take home a bottle. That was the tradition among the clerks. We felt that we were underpaid enough that we could take home a bottle of Yugoslavian Chardonnay.
You redeemed a bottle, or you walked it out?
No, we just walked it out.
Okay.
I'm not sure I ever asked permission.
Okay.
But this is back in the days when there actually was a Yugoslavia, and I remember there was a Yugoslavian Chardonnay, there was a Yugoslavian Cabernet, and eventually I worked my way all the way up to this sort of $6 bottle of cava, the Freixenet, I believe. But
I think it's $8 now.
Yeah. But it was actually a pretty good way to develop a palate, because it was like starting at the bottom of Mount Everest instead of being helicoptered to the big base camp. I know a lot of guys who started with cult Cabernets and never really tasted.
Right. They don't have the foundation.
They never tasted the sort of $4 bottle of Sylvaner, but I did, and but I really started to develop an enthusiasm then for wine, and of course as my novel, as I get the first check from my novel, it wasn't that big, but then the novel pretty quickly sold to the movies and so on, and so I started, improving my my drinking, and
so that interest and passion stayed with you from the store. This is good. Let's do more.
Yeah, and the book was published in 1984, and so along with a bit of a windfall of cash. In 1985, the 1982 Bordeaux vintage was released in the marketplace.
That was like Parker's bar mitzvah.
Yeah, and I was, I had just become aware of Robert Parker and subscribed to his newsletter, and so I actually bought 82 Bordeaux, and at the same time I went to England for the publication of the book, where I met Julian Barnes, the novelist, who was he was probably a year or two ahead of me in terms of his own enthusiasm and knowledge,
but not way ahead.
Yeah, it's like when you're playing tennis, you want to play with somebody that's better than you, but but isn't John McEnroe,
because he wouldn't step on the court with you.
And so Julian, I'll actually never forget. He invited me over to his house. I had a night free during my book tour, and we met at a party and. he invited me over, and he served me in 1962 and in 1967 Chateauneuf de Pape from Jaboulet.
Were you aware of Rhone wines?
Les Cèdres was the vineyard, and but I remember in college I used to buy Chateauneuf de Pape for my dates because it sounded good. It was very robust, and it wasn't too expensive.
Right.
But I sort of assumed because I liked it in college, I sort of assumed that it probably wasn't very good. Now that I was developing some knowledge, and when I had these two, then like 20-year-old Chateauneuf de Pape, I was blown away by how complex they were, and this sort of this started a wine relationship, and also I think in many ways was the beginning of my second phase of connoisseurship. And
I think in one of your columns, articles, you talk about sort of a pen pal writing relationship.
Yeah,
where you compared notes and the evolution of your taste.
Our friendship coincided with the invention of the fax machine. And so
that's right.
We started faxing each other back and forth, and along with
it that rolly fax or the flat paper one?
Well, no, for many years it was the waxy, rolly,
grayish
paper that smudged and
right.
But
carcinogenic.
We wrote about books and gossip and so on, but we also send each other wine notes virtually every morning, and so I guess in some ways that was the start of my wine writing career.
So the interest in wine, the ascent started when your first book came out, which really silly expression put you on the map. But so let's progress. Let's get to the wine thing. You continued to write more books, but when did you first get into wine writing, which was, I guess, a second vocation because you were a novelist?
Yeah, well, it was about 10 years later. In late 1995, I believe, my friend Dominique Browning, who I knew from the literary world, she used to work at Esquire and Newsweek, and she took over the editorship of House and Garden magazine, one of its second or third incarnation. And she, sort of wisely felt that the kind of people who were interested in decorating and gardening and so on were also interested in food and wine. And so she decided she wanted a wine column. And she knew, as a friend who'd been to my apartment and been out to dinner with me, she knew that I was very passionate and enthusiastic about wine. And when she started, when she started reading, the wine writing current at the time, honestly, there wasn't much worth reading.
The magazines, right?
Parker's very informative, but he's not much of a writer. And the Wine Spectator's kind of very
decanter
and very travel-y and technical, and but as someone who is really a connoisseur of writing, Dominique didn't find anything out there that she thought was interesting, and she called me up and said, "Have you ever considered writing about wine?" And my first response was, look, I love wine, but I don't. There's no way I know enough about it to be writing about it. And she felt that, some of the best teaching was done by people who are just a few chapters ahead of the textbook from the students. And she said, "Why don't you just write about it from the point of view of someone who's learning, someone who, may not know everything there is to know about wine." And and indeed, in my very first column, which was about California Chardonnay, I admitted, number one, that I was not much of a fan of California Chardonnay, and number two, I still didn't really understand what malolactic fermentation was. And
technical term.
But what finally encouraged me, or what she encouraged me, she said, look, as a novelist, you're good at telling stories, you're good at writing about people, and she said, you're also good at metaphor and simile, and indeed, I think that I decided early on that I wanted to, number one, tell the stories of the characters behind the wines, and number two, to try to come up with the equivalence of the aesthetic experience of tasting wine. And
Explain that to me.
Well,
the equivalence of the taste. What did you mean?
Well, what I mean is there are several ways of describing the experience of tasting a wine. And one of them is...
Literally the descriptor thing.
Well, literally, yeah.
Horse.
There's the literal way.
Graphite.
Which I find, I mean, I know what it means to say that cote rôtie tastes like raspberry and bacon. But at the same time, it sounds kind of crazy to somebody who hasn't tasted cote rôtie. And honestly, I think that some of these descriptors are just hackneyed and kind of plugged in automatically.
White hibiscus flowers.
Yeah, and Chablis is always going to taste like oyster shells. And
minerality.
So, I wanted to find something that was. I just felt like metaphor and simile often do better. I mean, one of my earliest descriptors for Petite Syrah was that it was much like a Chevrolet Suburban, as opposed to a Romanée Sans Vivant might be more like a Ferrari, but I felt like because I was lacking in, for instance, horticultural knowledge, I don't know anything about flowers. So all of this school of English wine writing that compares the bouquet of wines to floral scents was completely beyond my capabilities, and frankly, not of much interest to me as a reader and wine drinker. So I just tried to sort of branch out in my own.
When you looked around, was anyone doing that? I mean, everybody
not
was
really,
more technical and
not really at the time. Yeah, I mean,
so that was a fun thing. That's what Dominique was looking for.
Happily, wine writing has evolved a great deal since then.
Yeah, I want to.
But at the time, I don't think I mean, honestly, it was mostly you had this sort of English kind of, the sort of floral aroma school of wine writing, and then you had the American sort of highly technical focus on winemaking technique and barrels and so on, and I just thought there was room for something else,
Yeah, that was good. So in the next 10 years, you do the column for 4 or 5 years, but within the next 10 years, you write a couple of books. You bring all your essays.
Well, I published. I actually
Bacchus and Me.
About 4 years into this gig, I was approached by a small press, and they asked if I would consider collecting these columns in a book. And I then went to my publisher, Alfred A. Knopf, my editor, Gary Fisketjon, and I said...
Who was an old friend.
Yeah, and I said, is this okay, or do you guys want to publish this? And they just looked at me like I was crazy. And so indeed, I signed a little contract with this small press, Alliance Press, and the book ended up selling 40,000 copies in hardcover, which was kind
I
of
remember when it came out,
it was I don't know. I mean I do think that early writing of mine had an impact and was somewhat influential, and it was quite extraordinary to me that there was that there was this market and this interest out there. Of course, subsequently, my publisher Knopf has decided to publish my wine books, but they were as surprised as I was.
So 5-6 years later, you write a second wine book.
Yes.
Hedonist in the Cellar.
Hedonist in the Cellar.
Similar format, essays and columns and all that.
And it was I don't know. I very, very proud of those books. It never occurred to me that I would be a wine writer. Of course, you have to keep going in a sense, because as much as I am proud of Bacchus and Me, it's a little outdated now. It was
right.
But one of the things that I did in that book was I was one of the first people to write about what was happening in Napa and Sonoma in the 90s. I actually grew up.
Which is when the cult thing really started to blow up, right?
As an East Coast person and as somebody who, had friends in England, I was very much a Francophile. So when Dominique Browning hired me to write for House and Garden, she said, you're really going to have to buff up on California wines pretty quickly. And
why? I mean, she felt there had to be a domestic slant?
Not a slant, but she felt, and also the food editor of House and Garden, Laura Zarubin, felt that that we couldn't totally slight California wines.
It had to be part of the.
And so I had a very early, before I even started, I was sent out to Napa and Sonoma by Laura Zarubin, arranged a trip. One of the first people, the very first person I visited was Helen Turley, who Robert Parker, I believe, dubbed the wine goddess.
Napa royalty.
But Helen Turley was very much one of the creators of a certain style of wine in Napa in the 90s.
Which Parker loved.
Low production, super ripe, voluptuous, fruit-forward wines. So this was my very first appointment in Napa. As I drove up from San Francisco that morning, and I had never tasted wine in the morning. I'd never really tasted wine. I mean, I had drunk it, but and it was quite.
You weren't up in the morning in the old days.
The old
know
days,
that?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Noon used to be my morning.
Yeah.
But so I went up there and I went to I was a little bit early, so I went to the Oakville Grocery.
Still there.
Great little place, right next to the facility where Helen was had a custom crush operation, and since I was early, I decided to go in. I had a double espresso, and I suddenly, as I was finishing my double espresso, I suddenly remembered that I had been specifically told by the food editor of House and Garden not to drink coffee before my morning wine tasting.
Right.
So
that's a Psalm thing too.
Yeah, then I was a little. Then it made me even more nervous, and then I went and met Helen Turley, who's a very daunting figure. She was taller than me for one thing.
Blonde hair.
Yeah, she's sort of this somewhat Amazonian figure.
Good description.
She was a little. I don't know. She was a little. I mean, she knew exactly who I was. She knew that I was a novelist who had written about cocaine in the 80s, and I think she just wondered what the hell I was doing there. And so she said to me,
almost a resentment, like, "What are you doing here?"
Quite possibly,
maybe?
yeah.
Okay.
So she said, so what? Well, at that time, we were just supposed to be tasting her Chardonnays. And she said, "So what California Chardonnays do you like?" And I said, "Well, honestly, I don't really drink much California Chardonnay. I said I'm more of a white Burgundy person."
Oh boy!
And I said, but there's one that I like. It's Peter Michael, and I had no fucking idea that she had made those wines for 5 or 6 years, and so suddenly she melted a little bit, or not, she didn't melt, but she thawed a little bit, and so I was deemed worthy of tasting the Chardonnays.
That was totally innocent, how that all came out and everything.
Yeah, no, it was a complete.
This guy ain't so bad.
Complete fluke on my part, but. I tasted her Chardonnays, which then were not estate grown. She was purchasing fruit from the Lorenzo and Gower and Hudson vineyards, and I was honestly quite blown away. I mean, they're so extravagant and they're so rich and luscious, and
really.
So I sort of had a little epiphany, thinking, hey, this is pretty damn cool. And
but stylistically, I mean, that style you were okay with? That big, bold.
I didn't have any orthodoxy then. I just liked what I liked.
I get that, right? Yeah. But you like that. That wasn't like this is too unctuous, or no. It was impressive.
No, at the time I just sort of felt, this is, you can't have too much of a good thing,
right.
And it was, like what, too much cleavage, which is basically what those wines
ain't happening.
Are like.
Right. We'll take it.
I like cleavage.
Yeah.
But while I was there, because I reacted well to the wines and because I made some comments that apparently weren't completely idiotic, she asked me if I'd like to taste some reds. And she, at that time, was making the first vintages of Colgan.
That's right.
I think it was called Colgan Schrader then. And Bryant family.
That's right.
And
Martinelli, by the way.
And
yeah.
And the Martinelli wines were at their own winery,
Right.
but I tasted these two Cabernets, and I was pretty fascinated because for young Cabernet they were surprisingly approachable, and the tannins were surprisingly soft, and again incredibly rich and ripe, and so I was almost there at the birth of this style, and I wrote about Helen. I wrote about the Turley Zinfandels, and I then went over and met her brother Larry, and she was at that time making the Turley Zinfandels.
Those were very individualistic compared to other Zins.
And I also managed to get over and meet Bill Harlan. Harlan Estate being, perhaps the ultimate of the cult Cabernets, and he,
nothing spared.
Yeah.
With him.
So I have to admit, I was very enthusiastic about these wines, and I wrote about them early on, and I became a bit of a partisan, or at least a fan, and that was a very distinct moment, the birth of this style of wine, and we're now at a point of history where the pendulum has very much swung the other way, and even Harlan is alleged to be dialing their style back, and restraint and balance are now the buzzwords of the day, whereas ripeness was at that time, ripeness and
fruit forward,
fruit,
big,
and,
mouth-filling unctuous wines.
Trumpian superlatives were the order,
terrific, tremendous,
the order of the day in the 90s, and now everybody wants to talk about how austere and balanced their wines are.
So for you went through a period. You had an evolution because I guess you cut your teeth in that, time and type of wine and all that.
Yeah,
but
and
your
also
taste
remember,
evolved.
Yeah, but remember, I was a fan of Chateauneuf du Pape at that time,
right?
And Chateauneuf, coming from an incredibly warm region, Chateauneuf was a very rich, powerful wine. Again, a wine much favored by Robert Parker and his.
He's a big Rhone guy.
Big, powerful palate.
Yeah.
So it wasn't. I don't know. I didn't have any. I didn't have any preconceptions about wine, and purity of style, or I just wanted to be blown away, and those wines blew me away.
It's fair to say, when you started writing about wine, and respond to this statement, you wrote more as a lover than a critic.
Yeah.
You weren't out there criticizing. You were taken by it. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. Well, in fact, I would say it's still the case because I have the luxury of writing about what I like. Honestly, if I were a full-time journalist, I would have to write about lots of wines that I don't really like. But I get to choose my subjects, and I just sort of feel like life is too short to talk about how much I hate certain styles of wine.
So you have the artistic leeway. So that was one of my questions. How do you choose your columns? What's your inspiration? Yeah. So one of the answers was you could sort of do what you want.
Yeah.
But now how do you come up with specific ideas?
Oh, I'm mostly from, several ways, but from my travels. But usually my travels, by the time I get someplace, I'm already pretty much know where I'm going. I get a lot of my ideas from sommeliers. These guys are in the front lines, and they taste wine every day. And here in New York, we have the most incredible community of sommeliers, and when we have for the last 10, 15 years. It all started back in the 80s with Daniel Jonas.
Restaurants were temples,
and
chefs became rock stars, and now the new rock stars are somms, right?
Yeah. And in fact, the juice is
That's your most
The juice
recent
is
wine.
dedicated to about 30
Kosher wines, the
30
juice.
different sommeliers who over the years have helped educate me about wine. So I mean that's one big source of wine knowledge for me.
Was there an influence, an aggregate influence of the sommeliers? Was it the restrained wines? Was it European? Was it new regions?
Well, I think all of the above.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's really interesting about Somm culture is that I mentioned Robert Parker back in the 80s. I mean, Parker educated a generation of American wine drinkers, and he had for better or worse, he had a big influence on the way that wines are made around the world. Although he would deny it, I think it's undeniably true. There has since been, I don't quite want to say a backlash, but I think that it's really interesting the way that as Parker's influence has waned slightly, what has filled that void has been, I think, basically the sommelier community, and it's interesting that if I could caricature this sort of the influence of sommeliers on wine culture. If Parker loves low acid wines, sommeliers like high acid wine.
Right.
Parker likes ripe wines. Sommeliers tend to like restrained wines. I mean,
Subtle.
basically, this is like we're talking about polar opposites here, and part of that has to do also with sommeliers usually are thinking about wine as an accompaniment to food.
Right.
Critics like Parker and James Suckling and
Straight up review.
These guys are tasting wines, without the context of food and the dining experience, and they're lining up sometimes 15 or 20 glasses at a time. I do this sometimes myself. I participate in a lot of these
But you eat and
tastings.
drink a lot more than, so.
Much rather
I mean,
eat
you're
and drink.
pairing, so your point's well taken.
But if you taste 20 wines at a time, the one that's going to stand out is going to probably be the big bold one, because you're going to get a little palate fatigued at some point. And so I do think it's very interesting that there's a new generation of wine influencers, and that
I want to talk about
sommeliers, but also
social media,
people with podcasts.
It's
and
more
so on.
democratized,
it's
right?
much-
There's more voices.
Yeah. And it's a great thing. It's hard to believe, but back in '96 when I started, there was the Wine Spectator, there was Parker. There were a few, there's some Decanter. There were a few English wine
There were like
writers out there,
Berghounds and Tanzers, or not even then.
But there weren't
smaller
that
guys.
There wasn't that much general interest kind of wine writing. Wine writing for people who weren't necessarily fanatics, or people who didn't necessarily subscribe to a wine-specific publication.
Right.
And happily now, that's very far from the case.
But now, you look at a Instagram site from a Patrick Cappiello or a Pascaline Lepelletier, and
I
there's
follow those
discovery. There's discovery. Not even in a blogger. You see what they're drinking.
Yeah.
Chenin Blanc or whatever.
Oh, yeah, always
Those guys are big.
curious
voices.
to know what Patrick is drinking besides Modelo beer.
Right, right. We're talking to Jay McInerney. What's your take on the natural wine movement? We're in Brooklyn right now.
I
Where
know,
Robert
Greg.
is. This is ground zero.
Yeah,
for
I'm
the
going to be crucified here.
Well, no. I mean, I kind of got drawn into it because by doing this show, you follow,
Right.
Everything going on, and it's a big thing right now.
Theoretically, I love the idea of natural wine, but
And a lot of what you drink is natural.
yeah, and some of the greatest winemakers in the world are drawn to the natural winemaking methods and also viticulturally sound practices. So many of my favorite winemakers are biodynamic.
Right.
Or at the very least organic. In Alsace, in Burgundy, most of the top names are biodynamic. Now, I don't really fully understand, the Steiner philosophy and all of
the ram's horn.
And all of the solutions that are applied to the vineyard. But at the very least, I think the people who practice biodynamics are much more involved in the health of their vineyards and much more committed to not poisoning us and not poisoning their vines. So I'm 100% in favor of that.
But I'm alluding to like these orange wines and these pet nats.
Well, no, I love orange. I've been a fan of the Italian orange wines for 25 years.
Nothing new to you.
But the only thing that I worry about is people jumping in too quickly to natural winemaking, which is to say, doing away with all preservatives like SO2 and so on. A lot of these wines are bacterially flawed, and they taste like shit.
And there's an inconsistency.
And I don't like wine that tastes like shit.
That's a fair point, and that's a fair knock.
So I do,
on the movement.
But I. And sometimes when somebody serves me a seriously flawed wine and espouses its natural qualities, I sort of think, but it doesn't taste good, and I'm not in favor of that. So I think I really applaud the movement, but some of you have to have absolutely impeccable winemaking and really careful shipping, storage, etc., in order to
preserve and consistent,
control and preserve these wines. That's all.
All right, I want to ask you a couple more questions. Then we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to subject you to our wine list. What newer wines and regions are exciting you now? I mean, obviously, in your columns and just your personal taste, you've come across stuff.
All right. Well, I mean, I'll tell you too that my friends with whom I drink Burgundy will be surprised by. But I was in South Africa in November, and I had not been there since 2004. And the progress that they have made in the last 12 years just blew my mind. It was really there were some extraordinary wines and
whites and reds.
Whites and reds. Honestly, for me, the whites particularly stood out. The really old vine Chenin's and honestly, the Chardonnay. They're doing great things with Chardonnays. A variety of styles. I mean, there's everything from lean to opulent there, depending on. But they're starting to really develop a sense of place and terroir and a sense of what grows well where.
You got another one for me?
I was extremely impressed. I just got back from Washington State, which I've never visited wine country there before. And I drank some really exceptional wines there. I think Washington is having a bit of a struggle establishing an identity.
I agree.
We were talking about this earlier. And, part of the problem is, Napa is Cabernet. Oregon's Pinot. Washington, they don't have a signature grape. There's a lot of Riesling there, and some of it quite good.
All the big names like Leonetti and Quilceda Creek, they're all the big reds there.
Well, there's some great reds. I mean, you mentioned I did visit Quilceda Creek. You mentioned. Parker just gave them their 6th or 7th 100-point score. I mean, I think that tells you what style of wine it is. The first Washington wine I ever discovered was Leonetti about 20 years ago, and I was blown away because first of all it was Merlot, and secondly it was Washington State. I said, "What the? This is hard to believe." They're still making really good wines. There's also, I think, Syrah does really well in Eastern Washington State, and I had some terrific Syrahs, Cayuse, Rain Van,
Cayuse,
a lot of
Rain Van,
Reyvan, Vaan.
Good tip.
It's good tip. Another one I had, W.H. Vinters. I mean, there's a lot of really exciting small production wines out there.
So pay attention to that.
The state is dominated by Chateau Saint Michel, which produces 2 million cases of wine. But, it's been a real mothership for the industry. And in the same way that, Mondavi drummed up a lot of interest and publicity for Napa in the 60s and 70s.
Right. All right,
70s and 80s.
Last question before the break.
Right.
So you've said, I've pegged you saying this a few times, wine can be a stuffy, grown-up, elitist preoccupation. True? Well, here's the question. Have you, Jay McInerney, remained a wine populist? Or you can confess now with amnesty, have you morphed into a wine elitist?
Well, I don't think I'm a wine elitist in the sense that I write about all kinds of wine, and I drink all kinds of wine. My palate.
That is the answer, and that's the fair answer. And you're not an elitist.
But my palate has changed in the sense that I now, after 30 years as a wine drinker, I have specific tastes.
Describe more restrained,
that I would,
subtler.
Yeah, I would not force it on anybody else, but I've become a Burgundian more than anything else. Although I like, California and Oregon and even South African wines that conform to this model of balance, acid, restrained fruit. But I do like I love the joys. I think Pinot Noir just has a magic like nothing else. It's a wine. It's a wine for lovers as opposed to thinkers. It's a hedonistic wine rather than an intellectual wine. And Bordeaux is very intellectual. If you know your vintages,
there's more hedonism.
If you know your vintages, if you know your chateau, Bordeaux will always deliver exactly what you expect from it. Almost exactly. Burgundy is a crapshoot. It's like the girl who takes you to heaven one night, and the next night she slams the door in your face. I mean, it's a much less predictable, but I think for that reason more exciting wine.
I agree with you.
But at the same time, depending on where I am, I will. When I spent 4 days in Washington, I drank nothing but Washington wines, and I was really happy about it.
You immerse yourself into that particular.
When I'm in Napa and Sonoma, that's what I drink, and I end up discovering great things.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. My guest is Jay McInerney, famous novelist, wine writer, columnist, podcaster. We'll be right back. You're listening to The Grape Nation.
This episode is brought to you by Castor and Pollux, maker of America's #1 organic pet food, Organics. You put a lot of care and thought into what you eat. After all, you're a food radio listener. That thoughtfulness goes hand in paw with how you feed your pets. Purposeful pet food doesn't happen by accident. Castor and Pollux scours the earth to carefully select the best organic and responsibly sourced ingredients. New Pristine from Castor and Pollux is the only complete line of pet food made with ingredients that are responsibly raised, caught, or grown. Feed your dog or cat the new standard, like grass-fed beef, wild-caught fish, and vegetables grown without synthetic fertilizers or chemical pesticides. Pristine from Castor and Pollux. Purposeful pet food. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org/pets.
All right, we're back. You're listening to The Grape Nation. My guest is Jay McInerney. I want to subject Jay to our weekly wine list. Jay, this is a bunch of questions.
Yep.
Don't be too long-winded, because I want to get through them all.
I'll be short.
But it's about your tastes and everything.
Right.
So what are you drinking now? What's Jay McInerney drinking now? What's your current obsession? You may have answered it, but
well, right. It's August right now,
right?
And
that's all I'm concerned about is now.
To tell you the truth, it's the middle of August, and I'm really sick of rosé. So,
okay.
I for many years I espoused the virtues of rosé, and people laughed at me.
Now there's three books this summer. John Bonet just wrote another column and Punch about it.
And Whispering Angel, took over from Domain Ott and just went crazy with the category. And now there are rosé shortages in the Hamptons and panic. There's panic in the Hamptons. But what I love in the summer, honestly, is I like. Chablis is a special passion of mine in the summer. It's so light and flinty.
Does it have to be fancy or any?
I hate to. Well, honestly, I had a.
You drink Petit Chablis at all?
We had a big cocktail party at our house for a benefit, and I served Jean-Michel Brocard 2015 Village Chablis, and it was just
drank well,
terrific, particularly in that vintage because it's very ripe vintage and. Chablis obviously goes lean, but I also, honestly, I hate to anticipate anything you might have planned in the future, but I'm a big fan of Austrian Riesling.
Okay, and, we'll get to that.
Yep.
All right, so done well. Favorite wine and food pairing? Is there something that you go back to, stands out?
Wow.
You ooh-ah when you do it?
Well, there's of course the Chablis and oysters pairing, which is
champagne,
is one of the classics. There's champagne in almost anything.
Fried chicken, pizza, right?
Yeah.
Good one.
Yeah, that's
steak.
I have to say, I didn't mention in my last question, but champagne is the answer to many, many, many questions.
Underappreciated wine.
First of all, I always start the night with a glass of champagne. But sometimes it's right to keep going,
Yes.
And the idea of champagne as a celebratory beverage is,
we talk about that on the show all the time.
Should
underappreciated.
Should be opened every night.
I agree with you. So to decipher that answer a little, Chablis, champagne.
Chablis,
Yeah.
I like champagne and caviar just because I love it whenever I get a chance to eat caviar.
There you go. All right, so this question, it's usually New York, but go any direction you want. Mm. Give me your favorite wine restaurant and or bar. Restaurants where the attention service lists towards wine are, way above others. New York, Hamptons, abroad. What places? You talked about sommeliers earlier. Yeah. That makes part of what
I would say. Charlie Bird in Manhattan,
Robert Bohr.
I love the fact, and Pasquale Jones as well. I love the fact that Charlie Bird, someone like me, can go sit at the bar, and I want to have a red and I want to have a white, and I can order half a bottle of any white wine on the list, and they'll open it and serve me half the bottle, and then I have a half bottle of red. And if I'm feeling,
that in itself is a great thing.
But it's an incredibly well curated list, and it skews towards some of my favorite regions, like Burgundy, Northern Rhone, and Piedmont. So,
anything else?
Love Charlie Bird. I think that Rebelle has an incredible
great food
wine list, great food. If you're lucky, Patrick Cappiello's there, which is always a bonus. On the higher end, we're very fortunate in New York to have restaurants like Le Bernardin and Danielle. That
incredible.
If you have the money to splurge, those are two extraordinarily well curated wine lists.
I agree. All good answers.
Yeah.
Stop there. Jay McInerney's favorite all-time wine. Can you narrow it to one, or give me a couple?
I'll give you
life-changing.
I'll give you two. 1955, La Mission Aubryon, and
it's your birth year.
It's my birth year. That's why I'm familiar with it. You used to be, 55 used to be a real relatively unknown vintage because it was very nasty in its youth. It was one of those wines that took a long time, one of those vintages that took a long time to come around. I once could buy that wine for like $200 a bottle. Unfortunately, those days are gone. But and the other one would be 1962 La Tâche, which I have only been fortunate enough to drink 2 or 3 times in my life. But
that's it.
But one of them was just 3 months ago and blew my
Mr.
mind.
Fancy Pants Chevalier like you doesn't get exposed to that one?
That's a
That's a tough one,
very
right?
hard one to find. If you know where some is,
All
tell
right,
me.
so here's my next question. What's harder, finding that Romani Conti or marriage? Which one's harder for you?
Finding 1945 Romani Conti is
harder than marriage?
is the hardest thing of all.
So you're
But,
saying marriage is easy?
Well, I don't know. I either I'm really good at it or really bad at it because I've done it 4 times.
All right. Fair enough answer. Very revealing. Thank you for that. Couple more questions. I usually ask this to other guests. And it's not that it's inappropriate to you, but I ask because I have a lot of Psalms in here. And, my kids are in their mid-late 20s. So I say, tell me the best wines that you could buy out there for around $15, red and white. Do you ever, like the Brocard, how much was that?
That was about 16, 17 bucks.
So I'll give you that, right
there's
there.
a perfect one.
What about, you ever grab a cheap red?
Well, I think I think you can get some very decent Zinfandel for around that price. I mean, the Ridge Zinfandels clock in a little higher than that.
30, 40. But you can go.
But Zin is a great place for value. It's such a rich.
I agree. Great barbecue, summer wine, meat.
Now, here's another one. Côte d'Aron, either red or white. It's just for 15 bucks.
17, 18
you can get amazing ones. First of all, from like big producers like Gigot. Which are consistently good, but also you can get these these smaller producers who make Chateauneuf de Pape or who make Saint Joseph, and for $15, that's probably the best place for value.
I agree. The Rhone offers the best values for that type of wine. All right, last question.
Chile too.
Chile, Malbecs.
Yeah.
Chile.
No, that's
Argentina.
Yeah.
Carmenères.
Yeah,
in Chile.
and Carmenères, and there are some very good, Chardonnays and Sauvignon Blanc for $15.
People usually leave out Argentina and Chile, but that's a great value red wine. All right, last question, and then we'll move to our weekly wine sip. Do you have a wine accomplishment? Is there something you've done that? Like, was it writing? Did you got a James Beard Award for one of your books, right?
Yeah,
that's an accomplishment. You became a chevalier.
Yeah, I guess that's a bit of an accomplishment.
I mean, do you see anything else?
So years ago, I was inducted into the. I was made as some sort of chevalier of Cahors, which I
the region of Cahors, Cahor, which nobody knows where that is. That's the point of the show, is to educate people. One day people go, "Hey, Jay McInerney is
I have actually visited Cahors and written about it, which is why they gave me a medal. But because they were
good value wines there too.
They don't get a lot of attention. But
maybe this guy'll show up.
It is in fact it's the homeland of Malbec, which we just mentioned. And
that's right.
That's where it came from. And for many years, their wines were on a judged on a par with Bordeaux. Now very much eclipsed, of course.
Right, not for a long time. All right, all good answers. We're going to post those answers on our social media. I'll tell you about that in a minute.
Okay.
All right, Jay, we're going to move to our last segment. It's called the Weekly Wine Sip. Every week we taste a different wine on air. Gives me a chance to drink wine, gives me a chance to share it with great people like you.
Good.
So for our weekly wine sip this week, we're going to taste the 2012 Schloss, SCHLOSS, Gobelsberg, GOBELSBURG, Riesling Tradition.
Yep.
Tradition is one of the Rieslings they make. They make it in the old style, which is why it's called Tradition. It's from the Kamptal region of Austria. People associate Riesling with Germany, but Austria's making some pretty rotten stuff.
Austrian Rieslings are sensational, I think.
So just one last thing. The wine retails for about $45, $50. This wine's worth about that. Current vintages are about the same. You can find this stuff at better wine stores. It's not that hard. So what else can you tell me from your travels about Riesling, Austria specifically?
Well, one of the things that I love about Austrian Rieslings is they tend to be drier than the average wines from Nachau or the Moselle. They tend to be fuller bodied because we've got a little more in Comtal and other growing regions. We have longer growing seasons, more warmth. They tend to be fermented till they're dry. This one is very interesting.
So let's throw it over the tongue. Let's visually, we notice.
First of all, this one is interesting because
Deep.
It comes in a burgundy bottle, which
Right.
is very unusual.
Right.
Which I think might be some kind of statement because and also the color is extremely rich and golden. Which makes me think that there must be barriques, oak barrels involved in the fermentation, perhaps.
All right, let's go nose.
Yeah, it's got a kind of Burgundian nose.
For sure, for a Riesling, right? I mean, that's why I brought it in, because, I'm no dummy. I knew you were a Burgundian guy. I didn't want to bring in a Burgundy.
But once you get into it, it's interesting. It has a kind of apple cider fruit to it.
There's an apple cider fruit. There's a teeny
and
bit
there's a lot of acidity, which is what we tend to look for in Riesling.
There's a little mint and herb to me too.
This is why sommeliers like Riesling so much, is because of the acid. Because all sommeliers are acid freaks.
It's their favorite wine.
Yeah. I still can't figure out whether the rosé revolution happened,
Right.
but I still can't figure out. I just don't think the country has ever been converted to Riesling. And
I try to turn people on, and it's just too sweet for people, even if I get the cabinets and the dry stuff.
But this is why Austrian Riesling is so valuable.
So let's
because
talk mouth.
It's never, ever sweet. Well, not never sweet, but hardly ever sweet.
Right. So mouthfeel, it's a big mouth-filling wine.
This is a this texture. It's got a great texture. It's much fuller bodied. It's much more viscous than the average Riesling. I would say it's relatively late picked. Probably barrel fermented.
All right, let's do palate. We did nose, mouth, feel. What are you tasting?
Well, as I said, I'm getting apples. I'm getting, it's a very elusive term, but
Good acidity,
there's certain minerality, and underneath that's
stone fruits.
A quality, yes, stone fruits. A little, maybe a little barely, a little bit of apricot, maybe.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
So, 2 last questions. What's a good wine and food pairing for this wine?
Wow, let's see. I mean, I could actually imagine it with one of those pizzas out here, since we're at Roberta's.
All right, so this would hold up to that pizza. The acidity, the bigness,
like a little.
And the
obviously any kind of whitefish.
All right, I'll give you a sippy cup when you leave.
Striped bass, which is what we have right now out in Long Island,
running big.
or tile fish, with some sort of lighter sauce. This is I don't know. I almost think it's. I think it may be rich enough to go with lobster.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think it'll hold up. All right, so do we like this wine?
I love it. Yeah,
it's a very good wine.
I think it's
right?
a terrific wine. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so it's a beautiful Riesling.
That's the 2012 Schloss Gobelsberg Riesling Tradition.
Yeah.
Later vintages are available. It's obviously showing a nice.
Yeah. This is
bottlage.
not an anorexic Riesling. This is more of a va-va-voom Riesling.
That's the metaphor, Jay. All right. That's the novelist in Jay. All right, Jay, we're going to wrap this show up. If you have a question, wine happening, or event, hit me up at sam@thegrapenation.com. That's sam@thegrapenation.com. Follow us on Facebook at The Grape Nation. We'll post Jay's wine list answers. We'll post the weekly wine sip and our take on it. Follow us on Instagram at sbenruby, Twitter at benruby. And also,
or me at
wait,
J.
I'll get to that. I'm not going to leave you out. Check out our new website, www.thegrapenation.com. That's www.thegrapenation.com. I put one .com in there. All right, now Jay, where can we? I want to talk about your current book and where we can find you on social media. So on social media,
I'm at J. McInerney on Twitter and Instagram.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a Facebook page.
Also, Jay has a web page, which is
and I have a website.
Pretty.
The website's
good.
Kind of fun.
It's very good. It's up to date.
It's pretty inventive. Yeah,
I like it a lot.
And I have my new paperback, Bright Precious Days, and then the Juice is out in paperback. My latest wine book.
Right. Jay has 3 wine books to choose.
Bookstores near you. If you
And
still
Amazon.
have an independent bookstore near you, which I hope you do.
Yes. All right, so you can follow Jay at all those places. I want to thank my guest, Jay McInerney, for coming in and taking time out of a busy summer. And I think you said you're off to Europe not too far from now, right?
I'm off to Italy next, which will be
Okay.
fun. Yeah.
Always
fun.
I want to thank our engineer, David Tadashore, and everyone at the Heritage Radio Network. I'm Sam Ben-Ruby, and you've been listening to The Grape Nation.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. For our freshest content and to hear about exclusive events, subscribe to our newsletter. Enter your email at the bottom of our website, heritageradionetwork.org. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at heritage_radio. Heritage Radio Network is a nonprofit organization driving conversations to make the world a better, fairer, more delicious place. And we couldn't do it without support from listeners like you. Want to be a part of the food world's most innovative community? Rate the shows you like, tell your friends, and please join our community by becoming a member. Just click on the beating heart at the top right of our homepage. Thanks for listening.